9/11 was the turning point. The Great Recession that began in 2007 was the straw that broke the camel's back. Fear ate away at the ties that bind us together as a nation. The United States became divided. We stopped trusting our neighbors and lost faith in our government. Liberals and conservatives stopped working together to solve pressing issues like healthcare and immigration. We chose our news sources based on our political beliefs. Congress stopped addressing any serious issues in a bipartisan fashion, and the judicial branch became even more politicized. Even family holiday gatherings became contentious. We blamed others for our problems and refused to look in the mirror for solutions.
Hi, my name's John Guggenheim. My friends call me Googie, probably because it's easier.
In June of 2017, I went on a big road trip. I traveled from my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, all the way to Idaho. The reason I went there was to meet this guy, Ray Anderson. Ray is a conservative, I'm a liberal. In today's America, Ray and I aren't supposed to agree about anything. We're not supposed to make compromises. We're not even really supposed to like each other. This is the story of why I had to go meet Ray and how he and I found common ground. Since you're joining me on this road trip, I need to tell you why we're heading out. My motivation is the fear that our country's polarization could cause two national monuments in Utah, the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument and Bears Ears National Monument, to lose the protections given to them through their national monument status. I first visited Utah's Canyon Country about 30 years ago. I've returned time and time again to backpack, canoe, and explore the area. Unfortunately, I had only driven through the two national monuments. Exploring both was on my bucket list. Why would anybody want to mess with such places? The more I learned about the efforts to remove protections from the two national monuments, the less those efforts made sense to me. My life has been so enriched by traveling to our public lands. Of course I want to see them protected. I decided to join the fight to protect these lands, and the way I was going to do it was by making this documentary. I would travel around the country to meet and interview people about the current battle over our public lands. The only thing standing in my way was that I'd never made a documentary before. It didn't really matter.
I'm an angry man with an iPhone. So what's the first step in making a documentary if you've never made one before? Well, in my case, you go interview a United States Congressman.
I first found out about Congressman Raul Grijalva of Arizona while researching the public lands battle. I was surprised that by using contact information from the internet, I was able to set up the interview. I know that Ray Anderson and my conservative friends usually aren't fans of Democratic representatives, but you gotta give it up to Congressman Grijalva for taking the time to meet with an unexperienced filmmaker who can't even vote for him. I wanted to pass this positive experience to the younger generation, so I brought my friend and awesome musician Ray Flanagan along with me. On April 4th of 2017, we headed east to our nation's capital, and right off the bat, Congressman Grijalva described our federal public lands.
The public lands are the best shared responsibility and asset that represents our democracy than any other government entity, service, program. The federal government has jurisdiction over vast amounts of acreage all across this country, whether they're national parks, monuments, wildlife refuge, wilderness areas, all have been built up over the course of the history of this nation for one simple reason, and that's to create a legacy. I explain to people, this is, you own this little piece of the Grand Canyon. You don't know that, but you do. As a democratic symbol, for lack of a better word, we're unique in the world.
I had never thought of our public lands from that perspective. As American citizens, we're all co-owners of our public lands. Not just the park lands, but lands that are leased for mining, energy extraction, timber, and grazing. According to the United States Geological Survey, the federal agencies responsible for managing America's natural resources must meet both the public desire to protect them and the public expectation of economic growth based on them.
We all share in the monies generated by these lands, and we all have a say in how they're being used. That sounds like a great deal to me, but not everyone is in favor of federal public lands.
There's a movement. It used to be on the fringes of movements, which was to give back the public lands to the states or to counties. And that movement exemplified in one extreme by the Bundys.
Some of my family's in the real estate business, and every now and then they tell me stories about bad tenants.
Imagine a landlord leasing a property to a tenant. The tenant is ruining the property. When it's time to renew the lease, the landlord includes a clause that prohibits certain actions that could damage the property. The tenant doesn't agree to the new terms, doesn't leave the property, continues the destructive behavior, and stops paying rent. So the landlord sends the cops over to evict the deadbeats. Instead of leaving the property, the tenant calls all his friends and has an armed standoff with police. Not wanting the situation to turn into a shootout, the police leave the scene, telling the property owners, tough luck. Now put yourselves in the shoes of the property owner. Are you feeling angry? What if I told you this story is based on a true story? And if you are an American citizen, in this story, you are the landlord. This is your tenant, Cliven Bundy. At renewal time, he didn't like the new terms of his grazing lease, so he continued to graze his cattle on our land, but stopped paying his leasing fees, which now total over $1 million. In 2014, the federal government went to collect the cattle. This action led to an armed standoff. Not wanting a repeat of the tragedy in Waco, Texas, the law enforcement officers returned the cattle and left the area. Bundy claims that the land belongs to him and continues to graze his cattle for free on our land. Meet Mr. Bundy.
I want to tell you one more thing I know about the Negro. When I go through Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, and I would see these little government houses, and in front of that government house, the door was usually open, and the older people and the kids, and there was always at least a half a dozen people sitting on the porch. They didn't have nothing to do. They didn't have nothing for their kids to do. They didn't have nothing for their young girls to do. And because they were basically on government subsidy, and so now what do? They abort their young children. They put their young men in jail because they never learned how to pick cotton. And I've often wondered, are they better off as slaves?
And in another area by members of this Congress that feel that we need to divest ourselves entirely of public lands.
Utah is the hotbed for anti-federal lands politicians. Representatives at the local, state, and federal levels were undertaking a coordinated attack against Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears National Monuments. The centerpieces of these attacks were two bills passed by the Utah State Legislature. HCR 11, which urged President Trump to rescind the Bears Ears National Monument designation, passed on February 3rd of 2017. HCR 12, which urged federal legislation to reduce or modify the boundaries of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, passed on February 8th of 2017. The two bills blamed a laundry list of woes on the monument designations. Efforts were also being taken by Utah's federal representatives. Led by Senator Orrin Hatch, the Utah delegation started imploring the Trump administration to take unprecedented executive action against the two national monuments. Utah's Life Elevated and Mighty 5 tourism campaigns had given people the impression Utah loved their public lands. The state's actions against the monuments revealed their true colors and had immediate consequences. The Outdoor Industry Association showed their displeasure for Utah's actions by moving their convention to Denver, Colorado.
A political philosophy that sees the public lands as a commodity, not a multi-use asset for the American people, but a commodity. What can we get out of it? And then once we're done with it, move on. That commodity is around extraction, whether it's gas, oil, mining, grazing.
If you're like me, you're probably wondering what a national monument is.
Most national monuments are created by presidential proclamation. This unique presidential power was given to presidents by the Antiquities Act. This act was signed into law in 1906 by Theodore Roosevelt in response to a need to protect the antiquities that were being removed from federal lands. Several national monuments have become national parks. Many of our most treasured historic sites have been protected as national monuments. These include the Statue of Liberty, Fort McHenry, and George Washington's birthplace. Collectively, our national monuments are a living museum that preserves our country's history.
Why would a president use the Antiquities Act? And is it a federal land grab, as the opponents of Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears national monuments like to claim?
Antiquities designations happen, quite frankly, when there is a reluctance by Congress to designate areas. And we're not talking about going and taking your private property and making it a monument. This is already federal land that now has an additional layer of protection on it, so that for antiquity, it'll be there. And whether it's historic or scientific value, that's what the law says. I also find it curious, by the way, that the ire and the raising of noise about overreach, presidential overreach when it comes to using the Antiquities Act, only seems to occur when it's a Bill Clinton or a Barack Obama that makes the designation. It's gotten so politicized is because this person declared it an antiquity, therefore there's something fundamentally wrong with it. Some of the most important landmark environmental laws, it was Richard Nixon that signed those laws. And it was both sides of the aisle supported him and supported everything in the future.
Have my ears gone bad? I thought he said Richard Nixon.
Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la, Richard Nixon. Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la-la, Sha-la-la-la-la-la-la, Richard Nixon. Yes, it's Richard Nixon who left behind one of the most important environmental legacies.
It has now become this commodity issue where you don't see the bigger symbolism of our public lands. You just see, what can I get out of it that I think endangers our public lands? When you start treating our public lands as a throwaway product, we've lost it. And I think philosophically, the American people are where they're into preserving and extending the life of this legacy. And politicians who don't support that philosophy use the cover of the economy, jobs, expediency, energy independence, all bywords that have proven not to have any lasting power in terms of how it reflects in the public lands. We can't normalize the threat to the public lands. We have got to make it, like I said earlier, raise the profile of what this struggle is about, because it's quite frankly about our definition of ourselves as a people and as a country.
Upon returning to Cleveland, I continued my preparations and studies. The Congressman's statement about our treatment of public lands as a definition of who we are as a people and a country really resonated with me. But I wondered how the new administration would respond to the Utah delegation's requests.
Today I'm signing a new executive order to end another egregious abuse of federal power and to give that power back to the states and to the people where it belongs. The previous administration used a 100-year-old law known as the Antiquities Act to unilaterally put millions of acres of land and water under strict federal control. Have you heard about that?
I wasn't laughing like the witnesses at the ceremony. Besides the fact that the president was siding with the opponents of national monuments, I noticed several things about the order that disturbed me. I found it ironic that he wanted to end what he called an egregious abuse of federal power with an executive order. He mocked the age of the Antiquities Act. Our Constitution is the foundation of our country. It has served us well for over 200 years. Obviously, the age of the Antiquities Act has nothing to do with its merits. As I said earlier, the Antiquities Act was signed into law by Theodore Roosevelt. In spite of whatever shortcomings Roosevelt had, he is memorialized on Mount Rushmore, partly for his public lands legacy. If you're on Mount Rushmore, that puts you in the top 4. Maybe making fun of a law enacted by a top 4 president from your own party isn't such a great idea.
In December of last year alone, the federal government asserted this power over 1.35 million acres of land in Utah, known as Bears Ears. I've heard a lot about Bears Ears, and I hear it's beautiful. Over the profound objections of the citizens of Utah. The Antiquities Act does not give the federal government unlimited power to lock up millions of acres of land and water, and it's time we ended this abusive practice. I've spoken with many state and local leaders, a number of them here today, who care very much about preserving our land and who are gravely concerned about this massive federal land grab. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse, and now we're going to free it up, which is what should have happened in the first place. This should never have happened. That's why today I'm signing this order and directing Secretary Zinke to end these abuses and return control to the people.
The review included a request for public comments. Making this documentary wasn't the only action I could take. I went right to work trying to get the word out about the opportunity to comment. On May 6th in Salt Lake City, a rally was being held in support of Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears National Monuments. Ray Flanagan helped me put together a concert for monuments to show solidarity with the people rallying in Salt Lake City. Our music community friends joined in, and on May 6th we gathered to write comments and raise awareness and money in support of our national monuments. The following day, Secretary Zinke arrived in Utah. He spent 4 days touring Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante for his review. My favorite childhood vacation was a family road trip from Cleveland, Ohio to Yellowstone National Park when I was 13 years old. This kind of vacation is one of the many things that makes our country great. It is an experience shared by many of us, and it is on the to-do list of those of us who have yet to undertake it. On May 23rd, after a ton of preparation, I loaded up my Honda Fit for another road trip to the Great American West. I want you to see how much fun it is and how much of an incredible time you can have on this kind of road trip, this kind of adventure. It's truly an American experience, and I'm going to share it with you. So I'm grinning ear to ear. I'm wide awake even though it's 5 in the morning. I'm running on adrenaline and 3 hours of sleep. And hop in the passenger seat. We're about to have a great time. My first stop was along I-80 in central Iowa to shoot video of the Iowa wind farms. I was interested in the wind farms because of the state's bipartisan support for wind farming and the results of that support. Utah politicians were hoping to gain access to coal deposits in the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument and uranium in the Bears Ears National Monument. I needed to learn the current realities of energy production in America. In 1983, Iowa became the first state to make efforts to support renewable energy. In response to the 1980s farm crisis, a renewable portfolio standard was adopted by Iowa during Republican Governor Terry Branstad's first term. The goal was to diversify the state's economy, making it less dependent on the ups and downs of farming. Iowa's Republican Senator Chuck Grassley is credited for enacting a federal wind energy production tax credit as part of the Energy Policy Act of 1992. The bill addresses a wide array of policies, such as energy efficiency in buildings and appliances, and federal support for alternative energy. The bill passed with vast support from both parties. It's hard to imagine the cooperation needed to enact this kind of legislation happening in today's political environment. But most important is the impact that this bipartisan cooperation has had on the state of Iowa in job creation, capital investment, energy rates, percentage of wind power, lease payments to farmers and rural landowners, and incentive for economic development. The economic diversification sought by the state also came to fruition. One great example is in manufacturing. The Maytag manufacturing plant that had shut down in 2007 has been reopened by Trinity Structural Towers. The once abandoned plant employs about 250 people who build towers for the turbines. Two days later, I reached the outskirts of Bears Ears National Monument. I was happy to find wind turbines in Monticello, Utah. Monticello is a hotbed for a small but vocal group of anti-monument citizens. Next, I journeyed down the Bicentennial Highway, which travels through the monument. Although I had passed through the area on 3 different occasions, I had never noticed the Bears Ears formation that the monument was named after. My arrival coincided with the final day to send comments to Secretary Zinke's review of Bears Ears. As a newborn activist, I was compelled to send a message from the Bears Ears to my social media followers. Hey everybody, today's your last chance to get your comments to the Department of the Interior regarding your thoughts on Bears Ears National Monument. Right behind me, the Bears Ears. Let's get this done, let's do the work. The excitement of driving through canyon country got me the rest of the way to my windy campsite atop Boulder Mountain, just outside the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. Not long after sunset, one very happy camper curled up in his sleeping bag for the first of many nights spent sleeping on the ground.
The next day, I got to check one of the items off my bucket list. I was meeting up with my first Utah interview subject, Dr. Keith Watts.
Keith is the owner and founder of Earth Tours, a guide service based out of Boulder. Keith had generously invited me to join in the day's tour of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument with his clients Jack and Judy Gipsman. From the rim, Keith gave us an informative geology lesson about the Grand Staircase, pointing out the different rock formations off in the distance. We headed down the canyon into the back country. No trail underfoot. Keith just navigated us on a route he had created, traveling in the same way the Native Americans and Mormon pioneers had centuries earlier. We explored the myriad of life in water holes, zigzagged around hoodoos, and foraged berries and yucca. The desert was in full bloom. Keith's insights, expertise, and knowledge of so many different aspects of the environment we traveled through was amazing, and his passion for the monument was obvious. The route followed drainages and crossed slick rock ridges until we arrived at the rim of the inner canyon. A waterfall rushed over the rim. We ate lunch just above the waterfall, sunning on the rock with our feet cooling off in a pool. After lunch, we spent time exploring a cave used by Native Americans. The cave walls were covered with Native American artwork. I was face to face with a great example of the antiquities the monument was created to protect. Cooling off in the cave, we speculated about what the artists were trying to communicate. Our next destination was a slot canyon. Erosion had turned a crack in the sandstone into a deep, narrow canyon. With every step, the canyon walls narrowed. Soon I could reach out and touch both of the towering walls. Keith put on a show by using his climbing skills to ascend the walls. The monument is a climber's paradise. We doubled back down the slot canyon and started trudging up the sandstone slope towards Keith's truck. Our pace slowed as the hike steepened. It didn't matter. It just gave us time to literally stop and smell the roses. The fragrant desert cliff rose was just starting to bloom. Keith's wilderness guide skills and knowledge of the monument weren't the only reasons I was looking forward to interviewing him. Prior to founding Earth Tours, he was a tenured professor of geology at the University of Alaska Fairbanks with impressive natural history experience. In addition to his vast resume, there's one other thing about Keith's background that's really sweet.
My father was a forest ranger, and my granddad was a forest ranger. He put the hat on Smokey the Bear. He was the chief of the Forest Service under Roosevelt and Truman.
The creation of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument put an end to the efforts to mine the coal located within the monument. Utah politicians still envision having coal mines in the monument. But is that even realistic in today's energy economy?
They've had to close down a number of these coal mines because over the last decade, or half decade really, the world has changed because suddenly the United States goes from an importer of oil and gas to an exporter of oil and gas because of fracking. Mining coal in this day and age in the monument on the Kaparowitz Plateau is not economically viable. The wish to have a job in the mining industry that would pay well is only that, a wish. In my lifetime, I don't see any of these industries providing jobs in the area that's encompassed by the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument.
The Antiquities Act states that the areas of national monuments are to be confined to the smallest area compatible with the proper care and management of the objects to be protected. The Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument encompasses almost 2 million acres.
You know, you hear the state say, it's too big. That's what makes it special, is it is such a big area. And when you go to the national parks that used to be national monuments, they're getting more and more crowded. You know, sometimes you have to wait in line to go into arches or find a parking place. They're at capacity. And lovely as those parks are, they're full. And so here we've got 2 million acres that gives us room to grow in some of the most gorgeous country in the nation.
One of the complaints about the creation of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument is that locals had no input prior to the designation. Secretary Zinke's visit to Utah was supposedly set up to get that input.
The way it was organized by the state delegation that does not like the monuments was that Secretary of Interior Zinke would spend zero face time with the business leaders of Boulder and Escalante. And we'd asked his office, we asked everyone, and we were not listened to. We hope that they read the comments that we've sent in, but there's no guarantees.
The difficulty of making a documentary in the desert was starting to sink in. Keith helped out with my most pressing issues. Thanks to him, I spent the next morning exploring the wash near my campsite, bathing in a nearby stream, recharging batteries, and backing up data. My afternoon was spent interviewing one of the owners of the Boulder Mountain Guest Ranch, Brandie Hardman. The guest ranch is not your run-of-the-mill place to stay. In addition to traditional lodging, they provide luxury teepees. They host wilderness programs on subjects like survival skills and foraging. They incorporate a sustainable land ethic on the property and have undertaken land remediation projects, water restoration projects, and organic farming. I interviewed Brandie in front of the Sweetwater Creek and the beaver dams that were part of the restoration project. I wanted to learn the state of the tourism industry in the towns surrounding the monument and if Utah politicians were sensitive to the needs of the owners of tourism-related businesses.
Because of the influx of tourists, we decided to expand our business, and we have invested over $1 million in the last 3 years in renovations and remodels, and that goes directly back into the economy. So we hire locally, get all of our building materials as local as possible. It's disheartening to see that that is not really in consideration with this latest issue. We have called, we have asked for, return phone calls. We have put ourselves out there for just, being able to communicate, but we've all written letters and we've all done all the things that we're supposed to do on that ground level. The problem is nobody's hearing us.
One of the thoughts I had during the road trip was how the communities in rural Utah and the battle for our public lands could be viewed as a small-scale example of our country's challenges caused by the different goals, backgrounds, and worldviews within a diverse population, and the inability of politicians to work towards policy that works for all of their constituents. Policy that works for a liberal like me and a conservative like Ray Anderson.
Boulder is a unique area, and we've got ranchers, hippies, Buddhists, you name it, we've got it all here. But the one common ground why we are here is because we love this land. We did have a meeting in the town of Boulder, and we allowed ourselves this open dialogue to talk about the problems, and it seems that the government representatives are trying to divide us. So it was really nice that we put that meeting together, and our mayor attended as well. And we came together as the town of Boulder to make a statement at the public hearing. And so we did get to listen to it. And the issues weren't about the land, it was the management of the land. There was a person from the BLM office that attended. And they said, this is little things that we need to do to make everybody happy. And I'm talking about ranch land. But instead of throwing out, the baby with the bathwater, let's work as a community together to figure out what the issues are so that we can solve it. We are a very resilient town, and we're just made up of so many wonderful people. But the one thing is we do have the common ground is we love this land. And that's why, we continue to work together. So I think, the solution is in us, and we need to be given the platforms to have these discussions instead of a separation, which is much of what our county commissioners have done. You go into our public hearing where they actually made us stand in different lines and they made us sit on different sides of the room. I'm like, why are they causing this division when we all are working towards this together?
The local politicians were not the only ones dividing the community.
I was at the rally in Kanab, and that's where Zinke did his press conference. And they made sure we were on the other side of the fence, literally on the other side of the fence. Our county commissioner, Leland Pollock, was actually laughing at us as he drove through.
It can be argued that National Park Rangers are the most trusted employees of the federal government. I was fortunate to be able to interview Noel Poe, a 40-year public servant who was an Army veteran, a field and law enforcement ranger for the Park Service, and superintendent of 4 national parks, including Arches National Park in Utah. He studied forestry and natural resources with an emphasis on park management at Colorado State University. He now makes his home in Kanab, Utah, just outside the monument. He continues to work at making the wilderness experience better for his neighbors. At the time of our interview, he served as president of the Grand Staircase Escalante Monument Partners, the nonprofit Friends organization of the monument. Noel's background gives him tremendous insight into the value of our public lands, the many ways they impact our lives when we visit them, and the economic impact they have on the communities that surround them.
Tourism is the lasting economic value for the public lands, for our monuments and parks and our wildlife refuges and our national forests and stuff. Because people will keep coming back and back and back to enjoy what they've grown to love. We're getting over 1 million visitors, or right at 1 million visitors a year. They're starting to recognize the uniqueness of it, the beauty of it, the spiritual nature of it, and just the things it can do to your heart and to your soul once you get into it. And that's the value. That's the goose that lays the golden egg.
The Grand Staircase Escalante Partners promote science, education, and conservation at the monument. They provide resources to support the monument's programs. It would have been impossible for Secretary Zinke to meet with each individual stakeholder during his review of the monument. But it is hard to imagine a fair review that didn't use the Grand Staircase Escalante partners as a resource.
We contacted him various ways: Twitter, emails, phone calls, letters to the Department of Interior, etc., because we thought the review he was going to do would encompass all of the stakeholders in this area. He did meet with the grazing permittees, and that was good. He should meet with them. But he didn't meet with the outfitters and guides. There's 108 outfitters and guides that have a permit to work in the National Monument. They earn a chunk of money. They're paying taxes. They're putting their kids through school. They're using the monument for something that is respectful and appropriate. He also didn't meet with the Chamber of Commerce or with the business folks, the motel owners, the restaurant owners, the gift shops, the people that provide all sorts of services to the visitors coming into the monuments. For whatever reason, he decided they weren't important.
The Utah delegation hadn't released any maps or publicly announced what their intentions were for the lands they wanted removed from the monument. In spite of this, Noel had a clear vision of what was at stake in the battle for Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument and our public lands legacy.
One of the things that happens when land becomes private ownership is that we build a fence around it. And that eliminates the access to that particular land. The roads that now go through the National Monument, through public land, those roads would have signs up on them. When you come to a fence, it would say, "No trespassing, stay out," because it's private property. The thing that's unique about America, the United States, is that we have public lands that all of us own, and that we have a say in what they're being how they're being managed. And they're ours to enjoy. Not just yours and mine and the 4,000 people in Kanab, but look at the world population. We get a lot of international visitors coming here.
I'm from Malta, a little island between Italy and Africa.
I'm from Germany.
I'm from Chile.
From Sydney, Australia.
From France.
So I'm from Finland, she's from Germany.
We are from Taiwan.
From Germany.
We are from Copenhagen in Denmark.
I'm from Aberdeen, Scotland.
And we're from the Netherlands.
I'm from Korea.
South of France. La Provence.
This is the 5th time, I think, here in this area.
I love Utah, and I love Capitol Reef and Escalante, and it's just the most gorgeous nature I've ever seen. In the Netherlands, you only have flat and green, and here you have the mountains and orange rocks and everything, and it's just gorgeous.
It's worthwhile to visit.
It's wonderful. It's my fourth travel in Utah.
Not just for the beauty, but because they can get out and wander anywhere they want to on public lands. They don't need permission. They don't need to talk to the landowner saying, "May I go fish in that stream?" or "May I go into that cave?" or "climb to the top of that cliff up there." It's public land. They have the right to have access to it.
After parting ways with Noel, I headed east along the southern border of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. I was amazed by what I encountered. I watched rainbow-like cliffs glow with the light of the setting sun, hiked around impossibly shaped hoodoos, and once again encountered Native American rock art. My first stop of the next day was the Big Water Visitor Center and Dinosaur Museum. The presence of world-class paleontological sites within the monument was one of the reasons for its creation. over 24 new dinosaur species have been discovered within its borders. The monument is now acknowledged as the best area to study the late Cretaceous era. My next 2 stops help tell the story of our country's energy needs and how those needs impact the 2 monuments. This is the Navajo Generating Station, located just 20 miles from the Dinosaur Museum. The coal plant is slated to begin shutting down in 2019. As Dr. Keith Watts had stated, fracking and low natural gas prices were the reasons for the closure. When the coal plant closes, so will the Kayenta mine. Unlike the coal in the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, the Kayenta mine coal already has all the necessary coal mining infrastructure in place. A dragline bucket, a 17-mile conveyor belt, storage silos, and an electric train that carries the coal the final 80 miles to the Navajo Generating Station.
If the Navajo Generating Station and the Kayenta mine cannot survive in today's energy economy, how is there any value for the coal located in the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument?
I also visited the Glen Canyon Dam. The sacrifices made for energy in the American Southwest are easily understood from the dam's viewpoints. Off in the distance behind the dam is Lake Powell. Buried underneath the over 150-mile-long lake is Glen Canyon. Some people say that Glen Canyon was the most spectacular of all canyons. I'll never be able to add my opinion to that debate. The canyon started filling with water behind the dam when I was not even a year old. Glen Canyon was sacrificed to help meet the energy and water needs of the Southwest. Traditionally, land issues had always been framed as an either-or proposition. Protect some land, but make economic sacrifices. Extract resources, but destroy the environment. The state of Utah's own data shows that the outdoor recreation economy has turned the old equation on its head. The outdoor industry's economic impact makes coal's economic impact look insignificant in employment, wages, and tax revenue. In addition to the impending closing of the Navajo Generating Station, Utah's largest coal-fired plant is scheduled to close in 2025. The carbon power plant in Helper, Utah closed in 2015. Less plants means less demand. Of the 22 Utah mines that have produced coal since 2001, only 6 produced coal in 2016. Meanwhile, the outdoor recreation industry increased 5% per year, even during the recession.
In Utah, the old economy versus the environment equation no longer applies. Protecting places like Bears Ears National Monument and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument increases the economic opportunity for the tourism and outdoor retail industries, which dwarf the coal economy.
One of the more ironic things I saw before leaving the dam was a small solar panel array atop the visitor center. In another part of the country, due to lower energy costs, solar energy now provides the power for the Kentucky Coal Mining Museum. My route formed a loop as I headed back towards Kanab. I stopped at the bridges that cross the Colorado River at Marble Canyon, the start of the Grand Canyon, near historic Lee's Ferry where raft trips through the Grand Canyon begin. I walked from rim to rim of the Grand Canyon. I stopped at the viewing area of the nearly extinct California condors in the Vermilion Cliffs National Monument. Their favorite perch was given away by the white streaks on the rock walls. Next, I traveled up onto the Kaibab Plateau to see the Lefevre Overlook. From this overlook, the staircase created by the exposed cliffs that the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument is named after is clearly visible. Geological time is revealed in each step. The older rocks are at the bottom of the staircase, and the youngest rocks are perched on the top. The staircase actually continues all the way to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The younger rocks in the pink cliffs of Bryce Canyon are between 50 and 60 million years old. The oldest rocks at the bottom of the Grand Canyon are about 1.7 billion years old. I wondered if we as a civilization would continue to preserve what took so long to create. I passed by Pipe Spring National Monument, and I had a few hours to kill. Initially, I thought it would just be interesting to visit another national monument, but I discovered that the story of Pipe Spring National Monument provides lessons that apply to the threats to Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante National Monuments. Pipe Spring is all about the cultures that occupy the area around the spring. Water in the desert is a rare and precious thing. These rare water sources attract a myriad of life, including the Native Americans who occupied the lands around the spring since at least 1,000 years ago. The spring and the vast grasslands around it provided them with the resources to sustain themselves through both farming and hunting. In 1858, Mormon missionary Jacob Hamblin passed through the area and named it Pipe Spring. Word of the vast grasslands and springs spread, and Mormon settlement began in 1863 with minimal regard for the area's original inhabitants. After Brigham Young visited in 1870, a fort was built, essentially cutting Native Americans off from the critical water supply. The spring became one of the Mormon Church's tithing ranches, managing the livestock donated by congregation members. The cattle, milk, cheese, and butter made at the ranch supported church enterprises. Unfortunately, by 1880, the grasslands had been overgrazed by the Mormon cattle operation. The land which had supported the Native Americans for centuries was rendered useless in less than 20 years' time. The different cultural relationships with the land provide insight into why this happened. One of the Kaibab Paiute tribal members said this: "Within the lives of Southern Paiutes, there is an inherent understanding that all things are placed on this land with the breath of life, just as humans. This land is considered to be their home, just as it is for man, and it is taught that one must consider that rocks, trees, animals, mountains, and all other things are on the same level as man. Each has a purpose in life, and the one who created every living thing on this earth placed all living things here to interact with one another. It is said that the plants, animals, and in fact everything on this land understands the Paiute language, and when one listens closely and intently enough, there is affirmation and a sense of understanding." Contrast that with the words of Brigham Young. The increase of our children and their growing up to maturity increases our responsibilities. More land must be brought into cultivation to supply their wants. This will press the necessity of digging canals to guide the waters of our large streams over the immense tracts of bench and bottomlands which now lie waste. In these great public improvements, the people should enter with heart and soul, and freely invest in them their surplus property and means, and thus prepare to locate the vast multitudes of our children, and strengthen our hands, and solidify still more, make still more compact our present organized spiritual and national institutions. I looked out at the desert, imagining the vast grasslands of the past and the original inhabitants whose existence depended on those grasslands, and asked myself what impact Mormon stewardship would have on Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears National Monuments. An unexpected outcome of the Concert for Monuments was that a connection had been made with Utah Dene B'Kea, an organization dedicated to the protection and preservation of the Bears Ears area. They invited me to a tribal gathering near Combs Wash in Bears Ears. Check another item off my bucket list. I was excited to be part of the gathering and to learn not just about Bears Ears, but about tribal life. Up till then, my experiences with America's original inhabitants had been minimal. Any apprehension I had as I traveled those last few miles quickly dissipated. I was with people who had different customs, traditions, and backgrounds. These differences, however vast, were nothing in comparison to the things we had in common: the human connection, the shared love of the land, and food cooked over an open fire. One of the many highlights of the gathering was a field trip to an ancestral home. Potsherds and rock art were in the same area. These were the first potsherds I had ever encountered in wilderness. This was only one of the 100,000 sites thought to be located in Bears Ears. During the gathering, I interviewed two people, Kevin Madalena and Mary Benally. Kevin is a member of the Pueblo Jemez in New Mexico. The ancestral Pueblan peoples were the first inhabitants of the Bears Ears region. He's a paleontologist and geologist. His roles in Utah Diné Bikéyah include community outreach and field research. Mary is a Utah Diné Bikéyah board member. Part of her childhood was spent living in Bears Ears. She's one of the few surviving Native Americans who has had this experience. The Utah delegation claims that the use of the Antiquities Act to create Bears Ears National Monument was an example of presidential overreach. This is in spite of the fact that it is filled with the historic, scientific, and culturally significant objects that the Antiquities Act was designed to protect.
The antiquities you might find in ruins or kivas, granaries, and but especially people have to be more compassionate and sensitive because there are still people buried in the ruins as well. The proper decency in contemporary times is to leave people alone in the church cemeteries or Arlington National Cemetery. You know, you don't dig up people and study them because this is going to be an outrage in contemporary America.
One winter we lived in Butler Wash, and I used to see artifacts everywhere, ruins still intact. Everything was okay, and my elders always told us that we should leave those artifacts alone, stay out of the ruins, because also out of respect for the people that lived here before us. The Native Americans are very sensitive to things that belong to the people before us and also to the grave. I think that is true with all people throughout the world, that you don't mess around with your people's graveyard or cemetery.
If they start drilling into the lands and desecrating and mutilating it, it's tantamount for us going to Salt Lake City and start bulldozing over the Mormon temples and the Catholic churches and the Christian churches.
Many of the ruins have been pillaged, and also the graves have been desecrated. Things have been taken from the ruins, artifacts that have been left there, and people just took them and put them in their home. I don't know for what purpose.
It's imperative that these resources be protected for the generations after us, and my children's children, and for the survival of Native Americans and for our fellow Americans to enjoy these lands.
They weren't making stories up about the desecration of archaeological sites. In June of 2009, federal agents raided homes in the Four Corners region, including 8 homes in Blanding. 32 people were arrested for the theft of archaeological and cultural artifacts. Their story will never be told fully. Just like a forensic scientist needs to study an undisturbed crime scene, the full story of an artifact cannot be learned once it is removed from its original location. The raid re-energized the 80-year-long effort to protect the Bears Ears region. In 2012, Utah Diné Bikéyah entered into joint efforts with all levels of government in Utah to seek out an agreement on how best to protect and use the land in the Bears Ears area. Unfortunately, reading through the correspondence between Utah Diné Bikéyah and the Utah representatives indicates that the Utah representatives were not sincere in their efforts. Remember when Congressman Grijalva said presidents use the Antiquities Act when Congress fails to act? Utah's Congressman Rob Bishop had failed to act. The end result was the creation of Bears Ears National Monument by President Obama's usage of the Antiquities Act. I was hoping that the supporters of Bears Ears National Monument were granted better access to Secretary Zinke than the supporters of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument.
I noticed right away most of his time was spent with actually the opponents of the Bears Ears National Monument conservation. I get the impression that it was more of a flyover, kind of like the minimum effort. A meeting with tribal leaders. I think a grand total of time maybe it could have been an hour. The effort was really not made. Trying to reach out to the tribes for their input on what's at stake at the Bears Ears National Monument. I wish Secretary Zinke with Utah and Arizona and New Mexico make more of an effort to have a better relationship to get the tribes' input in tribal matters from government to government. It really saddens me to a point where even at this, this contemporary and present age, the Native Americans and the indigenous people in both Americas, they still have to fight for the ancestral lands and for equality. And this is, what President Trump is doing, and Secretary Zinke's indifference and dismissiveness. It's still a direct assault on indigenous people. It shouldn't have to be this way.
Secretary Zinke didn't just meet with tribal leaders for the minimal amount of time. He was downright confrontational. I want you to remember who Secretary Zinke works for when you watch this next video.
When are you going to meet with the tribal leaders? It's kind of unfair that you've only met with them for 1 hour, sir. Is there a reason why you're not listening to them more? Zinke, are you going to visit with the tribes more?
Nice.
I'm so nice.
Be nice.
Secretary Zinke not only brushed off the tribal leaders, he made time for San Juan County Commissioner Phil Lyman. Phil just isn't an opponent of Bears Ears National Monument. He has a federal conviction for leading an ATV revolt through sacred and fragile Recapture Canyon. The pre-ride rally was attended by Eamon Bundy, son of Cliven Bundy, and leader of the armed takeover of Malheur National Wildlife Refuge. When I was at the gathering, the sign guiding people to the event's location was vandalized. Community leaders like Phil Lyman had created an environment where monument supporters did not feel welcome in neighboring towns.
Today I'm taking children to the museums in Blanding, and I refuse to wear the t-shirt of the Bears Ears National Monument for the safety of the children that I'm going to be with. They don't deserve to be at the receiving end of just pure unmitigated hate and unprovoked hate. Some Navajo or Ute child that's in the 5th grade or in junior high, you're getting obscenities yelled at you, like, what did this child do to you?
The proclamation designating Bears Ears National Monument describes the area as one of the most significant cultural landscapes in the United States. I call it America's Jerusalem. Most societies use their ancestral lands, their holy places, and the archaeological evidence of their past to strengthen and preserve their self-identity. This desire to stay connected with one's roots is something many of us have in common with the Native Americans.
A self-identity, that's big thing, self-identity. Who are you? Where do you come from? You need to remember who we are. That way you have that power, that strength to say, hey, yeah, I'm Native American, I'm of the Ute tribe, I'm of the Hopi tribe, I'm of the Native Navajo tribe. This is who I am, this is my language, this is my culture, this is my tradition. And you can use that power in your everyday life.
The structure that you see behind me was built by Kevin's ancestors. The term federal land grab becomes even more ridiculous in the context of Bears Ears National Monument.
The funny irony is that on a personal level, sometimes I have like this dark humor. It's a federal land grab, it's already happened. The French already did it back at the French Indian War. The Spanish tried to do it in the American Southwest, and the Americans did it with their westward expansion. So I think the local people, or even the militias that are complaining about the federal land grab, historically the irony is lost on them. That's an exquisite irony right there.
Many of the uranium mines that supplied the material for our nuclear arsenal and the fuel for our nuclear plants are located within the Navajo Reservation, not far from Bears Ears National Monument. The uranium legacy on the reservation is nothing short of tragic. An epidemic of cancer, poisoned water supplies, tainted food supplies, and abandoned mines was left in the wake of the uranium boom. The original plan proposed by the Tribal Coalition called for 1.9 million acres to be protected as a national monument. The designation of Bears Ears National Monument in 2016 was only 1.3 million acres. The unprotected land was a concession to Energy Fuels Resources, which owns the only fully licensed conventional uranium mill, the White Mesa Mill, near the eastern border of Bears Ears National Monument. They also own the Danaros Mine, which has been inactive due to low uranium prices since 2013 near the western border of the monument. President Obama left the 600,000 acres outside of the monument to make sure that the creation of Bears Ears National Monument did not negatively impact Energy Fuels Resources operations in the area. Utah's HCR 11 states that rescinding the monument's designation would allow for productive uses, including energy and natural resource development. But is the potential boom associated with energy extraction the best use for Bears Ears National Monument?
I never understood this logic where people don't read on their history, But these boom towns like Tombstone and like Madrid, New Mexico and all that, it's only for a short gain, and those towns become extinct.
Most Americans love public lands, and my hope is that this common ground can be a starting point to heal the divisiveness that exists in our country right now. This ability to heal has special meaning to the 5 tribes who united to help create Bears Ears National Monument.
Historically, not many of us got along that well, but unfortunately, I think this may be the only time we'll come together again, as a unified whole. Just in the fact that natives are being challenged in ownership of their own holy lands and ancestral lands, and the rallying cry is always, to help one another. And this may be the only time that we'll come together peacefully, setting our historical differences aside.
Bears Ears, it has been like a place to heal. And when the Utah Navajo started talking about how we should be part of the management of the land here in the Bears Ears area. And when we all got through talking why we want the Bears Ears landscape to be protected, we came to the conclusion it was for healing. Historical trauma healing, healings between non-Navajos, like the white men, other tribes, that we were at odds with throughout history. And we want that healing. And when the 5-tribe coalition was formed, that's the same thing they came to, was healing. This is for healing, because the Navajos and the Hopis were at odds for a long time over land. So were the Utes and the Navajos, but they were sitting at the table talking about protecting this piece of landscape here in southeastern Utah. And everybody was concerned because most of us have strong ancestral roots in the area, and our ancestors left those footprints.
Heading out of Bears Ears National Monument, I had time to think about my project. Prior to attending the gathering, my public land history studies had focused on the Antiquities Act, Theodore Roosevelt, and America's 150-year-old public lands legacy. My perspective had changed. From Acadia to Zion, there's a human history that spans thousands of years. The importance of learning about and respecting this history is essential to understanding the full story of the public lands, the full story of America. Bears Ears National Monument has the potential to preserve, teach, and elevate this story. With this acknowledgement and understanding, the monument's mission of healing could be fulfilled. Marsha Holland represents a new wave of settlers in the community surrounding the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. She and her husband John moved to Tropic, Utah because of their passion for Utah's canyon country and the business opportunities that the monument presented. They owned a campground on the outskirts of the monument and currently have a wilderness guide business. Since 2002, Marsha has been conducting interviews for the Southern Utah Oral History Project. The project is an effort to document the unique cultural history around the monument. Her interview subjects cover a vast array of people, including longtime residents. Many of them are third, fourth, or fifth generation Mormon cattle ranchers. She also has interviewed people who worked on the monument's designation and management plan. Over the years, this project has conducted nearly 300 interviews that are available online. She and John raise their children in Tropic and are active participants in the rural community's activities. Opponents of the monument claim that grazing rights have diminished as a result of the monument's designation, even though the monument's proclamation clearly prohibits such action. Marsha's work on the Southern Utah Oral History Project has made her an expert on the monument's cattle industry.
What's unique about Utah, and especially in this area from talking with ranchers who are the main portion of my oral history project, is that it's something that they've been doing for generations. So their tie to the land comes from a religious side. They were called to this land by their church to establish towns. They were called here to have a ranching operation. At first, there was no charge for it. Then we have the Taylor Grazing Act, because the land was overused and overgrazed by the early 1900s. They had to divvy it up, and people had, certain permits they could use and only a certain number of head. Now, over time, now we're into the fifth and sixth generation, this model doesn't really work anymore. One of the contentions that grazing has diminished on the monument is simply false and is easily verified by looking at numbers that are available.
It's true to say that the state of Utah was not consulted during the creation of Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. But is that also true in the creation of the monument's management plan?
From a state perspective, I think Utah was well represented at the planning meetings, and that went on for almost a year. Was really extensive. And I've interviewed most of the people who were involved in the planning for the management plan that is the guiding document to this day for the monument. And they said it was one of the most difficult, but one of the most rewarding things that they've done in their life, in their careers, is to sit down and find common ground and establish a plan that worked for everyone, a management plan for the monument that worked from all the agencies involved, including the public.
Congressman Grijalva and I haven't been 100% truthful with you. There were state lands contained within the original boundaries of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. These were lands that had been given by the federal government to the state to fund schools. These lands are called SITLA lands.
Quite a bit of land was exchanged for more desirable land that they could do, Utah could extract resources from. So it was used for oil and gas. I'm not certain about coal. And then some of the land was exchanged for like a rec center down in Kanab, the public pool, in a couple other little cities. So there were some exchanges that benefited small towns. Right below me here was also BLM land, and that piece was exchanged to the town of Tropic only for recreation or education institutions. So the land directly below me was part of that exchange, which is kind of interesting. And we put a baseball field on it. So we have a nice baseball complex because of that land exchange. So Utah has a lot at stake here, and sometimes I think they know not what they have.
I met up with Mark Austin at his brand new business, the Entrada Escalante Lodge in the town of Escalante, just outside the monument. My time in Canyon Country had taught me that in addition to the Native Americans, there were two groups of people residing in the towns around the monuments. The locals are descendants of the Mormon pioneers that were sent by the church to settle in the area. The newcomers are the people who moved to the area because of their passion for canyon country, including the monuments. Mark has been living in the area for 47 years. It's hard for me to imagine that someone who has lived in an area for 47 years is considered a newcomer, but that's the way it is down there. Mark has witnessed firsthand the impacts the monument has had on the community. In addition to being a lodge owner, he owns the largest construction company in the counties surrounding the monument. He's a Boulder Escalante Chamber of Commerce board member, a community leader, adventurer, and environmentalist. He didn't bat an eye when I suggested he's a force of nature. The 47 years that Mark has lived in southern Utah and his position within the community have given him a clear understanding of his local neighbors and the politicians that represent them.
The management that's gone on the public lands by the federal government, because of the huge input by radical environmental organizations, is absolutely despicable.
They blame the federal government or the environmentalists for everything that goes wrong in their life. That's a political strategy of theirs to convince the powers to be that the government has imposed this monument on us and we're suffering and life's miserable and our kids are moving away and all this nonsense. It's rubbish.
Escalante's had 20 years to boom. It certainly hasn't boomed in those 20 years.
It's just a complete lie for our local leaders and state leaders to create this story that the monument's bad for our economy. Our economy has never been better. Of course, I have a largest construction company here in Garfield County now. I employ almost 30 people in the construction industry, and we are just booming. And that has been a gradual rise since the designation of the monument. If you want a home built here, sorry, take a ticket. You're going to be waiting several years. And every other building there is the same way. That's why we're seeing some of the locals build a 28-room motel down the road. We're seeing somebody build a 75-unit RV space down the road over here. They're building cabins, they're building motel rooms, and so forth. I just built this place, and we are full almost every single night. And every other lodging facility is as well. I mean, I know this not just from my own business developments here in southern Utah, but I'm also a board member of the Escalante Boulder Chamber of Commerce. And who would think that the Escalante, which is well known to be a very reactive, anti-environmental community, is now unanimously, the board members, or all members of the Escalante Chamber of Commerce, support the position of preserving the national monument.
There were 3 mills in Escalante, in Panguitch, and down in Fredonia, Arizona, just over the border in 1996. When that Forest Service stopped allowing logging and shut it down because of lawsuits, we lost 500 jobs.
One of their arguments is they want to turn it over to the lumber companies. There is no harvestable timber on the monument. And you hear the argument constantly that it closed down the Escalante sawmill. They never took one single tree off the monument and put through that sawmill.
Families could not stay in the county. And they couldn't stay because there were so few jobs left capable of sustaining a family.
People are moving in here. Are you kidding? What we're getting is displaced population, and that's sad. I mean, there's a lot of great local people. However, they're being displaced by people that see the opportunity and move in here. In the last 25 years, there's been 3 businesses, actually 2 businesses, that hire employees that have opened in the town of Escalante and Boulder by local people. All the other businesses, which are dozens and dozens, have been opened and developed by move-ins. People have moved in from out of the area. They see the opportunity, they see the potential, and they've done well. Part of the reason why we have a difficult time finding employees is there's a housing shortage here. We had out-migration. Why is there such a housing shortage here? I mean, when you look at the facts, they don't add up. It does not tell the story that the Utah delegation is telling.
1996, that little school had 150 children, 7th through 12th grade.
in 1996. In 2016, we declared a state of emergency because the school district come to us.
The high school population has zero to do with the designation of the monument or the existence of the monument. The real reason that this high school has diminished in population is due to the timber mill, as well as the quality of education it's horrible. Many parents, such as myself, were completely dissatisfied with the lack of quality of curriculum, the lack of quality of school teachers, and I removed my kids and sent them to a private school. And so has many, many parents.
Roads were being closed.
There's many more roads in use today than there was prior to the monument, unfortunately. And what these folks consider a road under the RS 2477 argument is a cow trail. Some of these claims that they have for roads go off cliffs. For example, the Gulch, the great hiking canyon. They claim that there was a road that went down the Gulch over a 40-foot waterfall. Yeah, right.
I absolutely support multiple use for everybody.
Their idea of multiple use is that every use can happen on every square inch of land at all times, every time. It makes no sense whatsoever. You know, quite frankly, like a community has zoning. Some areas they allow commercial, various densities of development, various types of development, some's residential, some's business. Our recreational areas need to be thought out and planned in the same fashion. We need areas that are big, open, wild spaces for people that are looking for a less dense area to recreate in a different type of use. National parks offer one experience. We need other types of experiences. And the monument provides an experience which none of the national parks offer.
There's this paradigm that without a monument, nothing is protected, no antiquities or the dinosaur bones. Am I correct in saying there's a number of layer of protections in addition to a monument designation?
Absolutely.
Just look at a typical story. Over in San Juan County and Grand County, you have county commissioners which have been arrested, they've been cited for grave robbing, for pilfering ruins. Native American graves in Native American archaeological sites, as well as driving their ATVs and off-road vehicles into very sensitive cultural areas. Many of them have been fortunately caught and arrested and prosecuted, some of which were county commissioners. These are the people that the state of Utah claims are protecting these resources. No, it ain't happening.
Under the current permittee program, I think about half of all the original AUMs have been suspended since 1996, which means there's no hooves on the ground. If you don't have an active AUM, you don't run cattle.
The reality is these guys are having a hugely subsidized operation. You know, if a cow gets killed, the government reimburses them for the death of a cow. I wish they would do that to my business. I mean, these guys they're entitled. It's just, they feel this great sense of entitlement. You know, and they turn around, they receive all these subsidies from the federal government, and then they turn around and complain about them. It's not just that they're biting the hand that feeds them, they're eating the hand that feeds them. It's absolutely sick.
Our cultural heritage, my customs and culture and heritage was being taken away.
This is a cultural war, and that's what it's about. This is about a group of people that feel like they want property that was given to them by God. It's that simple. The Utah delegation, which represents themselves, they're not representing the vast majority of Utahns, which are good Mormon people. They're being grossly misled by the political leaders of this state who are really on a jihad. You know, they believe that this landscape was given to them by God and they want it back. The reality is they never owned it. They know that they're lying to the American people, telling them that the federal government took it away from it. When you listen to this stuff, it's just complete rubbish. Americans don't like talking about this subject. It's really a tough one. Oh, he's a religious bigot. Oh, he's this or he's that. But people need to understand the reality of Utah politics. You cannot understand Utah politics until you understand Mormonism and the culture they've created.
And we're honored to have the Secretary of Interior here to take a look at the public land. He's indicated the willingness to talk to everybody on all sides of the issue.
They sent me out a form a request for a form where I'd fill it out and I could have a meeting with Zenke. So I did that. I filled it out and sent it out, and a week and a half later, they sent me a refusal to meet. Well, I know what happened. All of these meetings were being vetted by the governor's office in Orrin Hatch, and they said, oh my God, you can't meet with Mark Austin. He's going to tell the truth. We can't have Zenke understand the reality of what's going on here.
After almost a month in the National Monuments of Utah, it was finally time to head to Idaho for my interview with Ray Anderson. I stopped in Salt Lake City to pick up my friend and fishing buddy Tom Sharman, who was helping me out with the driving all the way back to Omaha. Neither of us had ever been to Idaho. Once we got north of Boise, the scenery quickly became amazing. The road traveled through mountains and paralleled rivers filled from an unusually high snowmelt. We camped in a state park an hour south of Grangeville and had just enough time to set up camp, catch some rainbow trout, and enjoy a nice dinner before sunset. The next 2 days were spent meeting and interviewing Ray. I had read about Ray in an article in the New York Times about the public lands battle. Ray and many of his neighbors have been fighting to keep the Clearwater National Forest, located just outside his home, out of the hands of private interest. Ray has a large business that keeps the old radial engines that were used in World War II aircraft in top shape. We met up at his place of work and headed out to the National Forest to conduct the interview. Ray's career choice and love of the outdoors were heavily influenced by his father.
My dad was a B-17 pilot in World War II, and he flew 23 missions. They were shot down on their 23rd, and he spent 4 months at a POW camp. But after the war, he didn't want to fly anymore, and flying jobs were pretty hard to get, so he got a mechanicking job, and he stuck with it until I was old enough where he got me a job where he worked, and I just kind of took to it. He was a pretty good teacher. And I was lucky enough to work with a lot of World War II veterans back in the 70s when I started doing the aircraft stuff. And you know, these guys had been around, and they were there when these engines were brand new virtually, and they taught me my job and they were conscientious, hardworking, and that's what they taught me. And here we are, been doing it for 42 years, and it's worked out pretty well. My dad would take us out to the woods, whether it was the Sierras or we'd be camping in Oregon, fishing. Whenever he had a chance, I'd go out to the woods, and he kind of instilled that in myself and my two brothers, and we still do it, and that's ever since I was 2 years old. I guess he's been taking me out on public land, and just have a great time.
I found it interesting how, unlike the Utah locals, Ray and the Idaho locals saw through and exposed the explanations given to them by politicians for the land exchange.
It's kind of neat we're having this public lands discussion, right? This is right in the heart of the area that they were, literally this was right on the spot that these guys were trying to privatize. And we had a group of politicians that were all for it, and several businesses that were all for it, and they were trying to make it happen. But when it came down to it, the people that actually live up here, we dug our heels in and we fought it as hard as we could. you know, we use this land. This is our backyard. And these guys, these county commissioners were telling us that we were going to lose our backyard. And that didn't sit well with anybody. We started digging in and fighting. And, you know, originally we thought it was only the Forest Service that was behind this. And it was hard to figure out all the politics, because it's, when you kind of press these guys down on a specific issue and they get caught, before you know it, it spins into something else, you know. But at first it started off, well, we have to log the national forest because nobody's taking any logs off of there and it's all going to burn up. And, you know, we proved them wrong there. They bring up something, we prove them wrong. And here we are, I don't know, 5-7 years later, and they still haven't come up with any real good reason for doing this except making a couple of private companies, real estate development companies, millions upon millions of dollars. You know, they have a $10 million investment and they stand to make well over $100 million. And, you know, those numbers will make some people do some pretty despicable things. And, you know, we're just here to enjoy our outdoors and maintain what we got. We don't want to be hopping over fences and gates. Well, and that's not even an option. If they make this private property, if somebody puts a cabin here, they're not going to let us hunt or cut firewood on their property.
The battle for our public lands has become politicized, but I sense that this isn't because of our Republican citizenry.
It's not a conservative or a liberal or Republican or Democratic issue. It's everybody who lives in this country. You know, we all enjoy this public land and we don't want to lose it. So the tree huggers have to get along with the loggers, and the ATV recreationalists have to get along with the backpackers. We all got to come together and make this work, otherwise we're going to lose it all.
Ray and his neighbors stood up to politicians, even though they shared the same conservative values.
Well, yeah, you know, this Idaho County is a pretty solid Republican conservative area, and you know, although we're conservative and we're for business, this was just too much to accept.
The citizens of Idaho also had the opportunity to submit comments on the land exchange.
We had a meeting in Grangeville about 1.5 years ago, and Senator Risch was there, and you know, he saw it was about a 90% against the land exchange at that meeting. And he said, well, we'll decide about this, but send letters in. So he got about a 90% against the land exchange. Letters came in, public, you know, the public's against it. And I think these politicians, as has been proven here in Idaho County, we've de-elected a few. If they go that far against the public's wishes, they're going to lose their job, and that's how it should be.
In the New York Times article, Ray had said that when he grew up, he was told that public lands would remain public lands forever.
It's been like this for 200 years. It's been public land, belongs to America, to all of us in America. Once it goes private, it's not coming back. It's done. You know, they're not going to feel sorry for us 100 years from now and give that land back. It's just not going to work like that. And we would have no control over who owns this land. And that's another one of the commissioners' invalid arguments is, well, nobody's going to want that property. You know, why would anybody want this? And it's pretty obvious why somebody'd want this property. This is beautiful. We live here, and you know, we want to keep it like it is. Once it gets out of public control, you know, it could go to foreign ownership. You know, let's say our economy has a down bubble and somebody else's economy is on the upswing, whether it's a European or Asian country. Boy, they buy land pretty quickly when it's like that. And, you know, it just, this land needs to belong to all Americans forever.
Ray's thoughts about the importance of public lands brought clarity to Congressman Grijalva's statement about our treatment of public lands as a definition of who we are as a people and a country.
In the business I am, I do things for just about well, let's say there's 15 or 20 countries we do quite a bit of work for. And every once in a while these guys will come up here and I'll take them for a ride either to this spot or somewhere further back, and they all say the same thing. We don't have anything like this where we live. You can't drive for miles. You don't have the freedom. That's why we're Americans. We got the freedom.
I expressed to Ray my hope that America's shared love of public lands could help heal the political polarization that divides us.
You come up here, whether it's for hunting or for fishing, and I run into people from all over the country. And you know, we don't talk politics or any political discussions. It's about where we're seeing elk or where the good fishing is, and everybody is just having a good time and everybody gets along. So that's a good point. Maybe that could help bring this country together.
Tom and I headed out from Grangeville towards Yellowstone National Park. We had a couple days before my final interview with Doug Peacock in Montana. We used the time to explore the world's first national park. Doug is a highly decorated Vietnam veteran, but he returned home bearing the scars of war. He found purpose and comfort in wilderness. Doug feels that the Yellowstone grizzly bears saved his life. In return, he made the protection of wilderness and the Yellowstone grizzly his life's mission. He is also an accomplished author and filmmaker. This documentary has focused on many practical reasons for preserving our national monuments. But when push comes to shove, I am one of those tree huggers that Ray was talking about. Preserving wilderness, such as Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument and Bears Ears National Monument, in and of itself is important to me. But preserving wilderness also benefits us directly. Op-eds by veterans and a letter signed by more than 1,000 veteran American military leaders confirm the importance of public lands and wilderness to those who served in our country's military.
I came back from Vietnam out of sorts, like thousands of other veterans. We just didn't know each other. And the one place I've always been comfortable is wilderness. You know, I grew up with a Boy Scout father in the woods of Michigan, and I discovered the Rocky Mountains. And so when I came back in Vietnam, I couldn't be around people, and I just camped out.
Secretary Zinke is also a veteran. Surely he would understand the importance of public lands to our veterans.
The guy was a very bad congressman for Montana, and I'm sure he's going to be a lousy Secretary of Interior too. But we got to fight Secretary Zinke from taking an acre away from Bears Ears. You can't touch it. We can't let him touch it. And we stop him right at the beginning, pull out all the stops, and go down there. And it's just because it was Obama, and they hate Obama, just like the state of Wyoming, you know, loves to kill big black animals like bears and bison and wolves, you know, and we had a black president. I'm sure that stuff is no accident. It's a really sick psyche that you know, people, basically human beings, you know, we fear what we don't know. We no longer know animals like grizzly bears, and wolves, and bison, and you know, the animals of my heart, and we hate what we fear, and people hate those things and want to kill them. So we have all of that to start out with, and it's got to be, you know, it should be fought consciously as, you know, the most important race war of the world, because, you know, our real true brethren are the animals we evolved with. You know, we did not evolve on farms or in cities. We evolved on habitats whose remnants today we call wilderness.
The healing power of wilderness isn't limited to veterans. Many of us benefit from its ability to give us perspective and a sense of place in the universe.
You get out of sight of a road in Yellowstone and you're in the century before, or maybe several centuries before. And that's where the wilderness is. And it's, you know, immediately, you know, your brain kicks back to the hunting and gathering days, and you see better, you smell better, you know, you scent the wind. And you're there, and you're a second-hand citizen if you got a few grizzly bears around, and all of a sudden, you're not the most important thing, and you're not diddy bopping down a trail thinking about your girlfriend or your portfolio. You're out there. There's something out there that could cause you trouble.
The opponents of environmentalists like to say that environmentalists care about trees and animals more than they care about humans. Oftentimes, this is a misrepresentation. Environmentalists recognize that preserving wilderness is essential to our own survival. Doug has expressed this idea by saying that the fates of men and grizzlies are mingled.
We don't have time anymore. We're going to be a little band of plastic-rich soil on the side of some mountain, in geologic time. So, that saying that the fates of men and bears are entangled, mingled, the same, it's a good way to think about life at any time, and it's no less valid today than it was 40 years ago.
I would like to acknowledge that the following scene takes place on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Lakota people. I decided to stop at Mount Rushmore as Tom and I made our way back home. I felt a need to visit the massive sculpture of Theodore Roosevelt. After all, his actions had enriched my life in so many ways. Like the 3 other presidents honored on Mount Rushmore, his legacy is complicated. The 230 million acres of public lands he protected during his presidency were created by removing native peoples from those lands. He stated, "I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indian is the dead Indian, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are, and I shouldn't like to inquire too closely into the case of the 10th. Yet almost a century after his death, the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition worked for and celebrated the creation of Bears Ears National Monument through a law enacted by his signature. As I approached the memorial carved into the mountain, my mind was filled with what was at stake in the fight for our national monuments. After filming, we stayed for the evening ceremony to light the monument. At the conclusion of the ceremony, all veterans in attendance joined the park rangers on the monument stage to lower the flag, a nightly ritual to thank and honor those who have sacrificed to defend our country. I was filled with gratitude. My thoughts drifted back to the journey I had undertaken, the beauty of our country's lands that I had traveled through, and the people who I had interviewed along the way. People who I am grateful to for their participation in this documentary and for their efforts to defend our public lands. I want to give them each an opportunity to express some final thoughts, but before you hear from them, I have some of my own. My first night spent in a tent was at summer camp. I only have 3 memories from that night: the kielbasa we had for dinner, ghost stories by the campfire, and something the counselors told us as we tore the camp down in the morning. They said always leave your campsite neater than you found it. As I've grown older, this has become a metaphor for what kind of world we leave behind for future generations. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "Here's your country. Cherish these natural wonders. Cherish the natural resources. Cherish the history and romance as a sacred heritage for your children and your children's children. Do not let selfish men or greedy interests skin your country of its beauty, its riches, or its romance." Are we to become the generation that disrespects the sacrifices that previous generations made in order to pass the public lands legacy to us? Instead of plundering our public lands during the Great Depression, the federal government created the Civilian Conservation Corps. The Corps worked diligently to improve the infrastructure of our public lands. Now, in times of a strong economy, are we to become the generation that fails to pass the public lands legacy to future generations? I ask all Americans to examine what it is we love about our country. The answers are obvious to me. Our democracy, the ideals expressed in the Declaration of Independence, and our freedom. But how about the country itself? The mountains, the seashores, the lakes and rivers, the forest, the deserts, and the canyons. We are blessed to live in a country that has such an amazing array of beautiful lands, and that many of these lands are available to us as public lands. My journey and studies have shown me that this love for our country's public lands is nearly universal. There are no signs on them that say Republicans or Democrats only. It is time for all Americans to recognize this common ground and unite to protect the land we all love. We find ourselves at a crossroads. If we continue down the path of partisanship, our representatives are given license to act in ways that don't serve the public. I'm not asking anyone to change their positions, and I don't believe that either party has a monopoly on great ideas. America works best when we work together, and when we work to pass the American dream to future generations. Striving for the more perfect union described in the Constitution is a challenging journey. We all stand to lose so much if this journey is abandoned. We tell our children to shoot for the stars, stars that have disappeared in the light pollution of our cities. Yet the night sky of my childhood still exists in Grand Staircase Escalante and Bears Ears National Monuments. The Milky Way, planets, and meteors tell stories and reveal mysteries that have challenged the human race since its beginning. God's creation is revealed in these special places. Are we to deny this vision, mystery, and inspiration to our children? Always leave your campsite neater than you found it. On August 22nd of 2017, Keylog Economics LLC issued a press release that summarized their study of the public comments submitted during Secretary Zinke's review of national monuments. In today's polarized political environment, the results were almost inconceivable. More than 2.8 million comments had been submitted. The study analyzed the 1.3 million comments that were publicly available by the end of the official comment period. They found that 99.2% of comments opposed the possible elimination of the national monument designations or a reduction in their size and protected status. The public comments weren't the only pro-monument communications that the administration had received. On May 2nd of 2017, the Wilderness Society and 450 diverse organizations sent a letter to President Trump, Secretary Zinke, and Secretary of the Department of Commerce, Wilbur Ross. On behalf of the 450 undersigned organizations and our millions of members across the country, we are writing to express our deep concern with your recent executive orders and our unified opposition to any efforts to remove or decrease protections for any national monuments. On August 15th, the Outdoor Industry Association sent a letter signed by more than 300 outdoor industry executives to Secretary Zinke. The people of the United States, today and tomorrow, share equally in the ownership of our public lands and these monuments. This powerful idea transcends party lines. It sets our country apart from the rest of the world. As business leaders, we simply ask that your final report remain true to the Teddy Roosevelt values we share with you, to maintain the national treasures presidents of both parties have protected, to defend the integrity of the monument-making process, and to assure these majestic places remain accessible for all Americans, sustaining healthy communities and a healthy economy. On November 16th of 2017, almost 600 business leaders sent a letter to Gary D. Cohn, Director of the National Economic Council. Secretary Zinke and Linda McMahon, Administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration, were CC'd. We, the undersigned 572 businesses, aquariums, and chambers of commerce, urge you to stand up for our national monuments by helping to end the job-killing efforts to roll back our national monuments, or the Antiquities Act, which first made these beneficial protections possible. On December 1st, a letter signed by 146 scientists, researchers, and academic organizations from 19 states was sent to President Trump and Secretary Zinke that described the importance of the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument to scientific research and discovery. There was one letter sent to the Department of the Interior that supported shrinking Bears Ears National Monument. It came from Energy Fuel Resources, the same company that had been cited as President Obama's rationale for removing almost 600,000 acres from the 1.9 million acre monument the 5 tribes had originally sought. For all the reasons cited, Energy Fuel Resources respectfully requests that the Department of the Interior reduce the size of Bears Ears National Monument. On August 24th of 2017, Secretary Zinke sent a draft report of his monument review to the President. The report recommended alterations to 10 national monuments. The report downplayed the overwhelming public support for national monuments represented in the results of his own department's public comments review. Monument supporters were quick to point out the inaccuracies in the report. In an Orwellian maneuver, the Department of the Interior issued a press release touting the public's approval of the report. The release used a quote taken out of context, misled readers by quoting op-ed pieces as editorials, and touted the praises of 2 organizations supported by the Koch brothers. Rumors swirled of a presidential visit to Salt Lake City scheduled for early December. A 3rd rally in support of national monuments was held in Salt Lake City outside the state capitol on December 2nd. 2 days later, President Trump came to Salt Lake City and gave a speech inside the same building.
Therefore, today, on the recommendation of Secretary Zinke and with the wise counsel of Senator Hatch, Senator Lee, and the many others, I will sign 2 presidential proclamations. These actions will modify the national monuments designations of both Bears Ears and Grand Staircase Escalante.
I don't think you can undo this designation legally through executive order.
If you attack one national monument, it's an attack on all national monuments or an attack on all public land.
The guys that are trying to do this, they don't have any valid arguments. You know, they have all these thinly veiled ideas, and as soon as it comes out and you can actually look at it, poof, it goes away. And, you know, the truth comes out, there's no replacing this. It'd be nice if the politicians and that are trying to make this happen, if the private companies that are trying to make this happen would just look away from all the greed for a little bit and see what they stand to lose. You know, have some morals about everything.
Hopefully, people wake up, because otherwise, this national treasure is going to disappear and there's no getting it back.
I want this land left in its natural state because it has so much beauty. It has so much healing power. If you learn to appreciate and see the beauty in this creation, it's got a lot of healing power.
You go out into the wilderness and you do something, and after 3 or 4 days, it happens every time to me. You know, I'm very quiet. I travel alone. I don't use trails. I don't run. I go places where you don't see anybody for a week, and something happens to me. Usually, it's about day 3 or 4. You know, and just it's really quiet, and it's magic.
This thing is an absolute circus in Washington right now, you know. And I just think it's no longer funny. This is, maybe it's great fuel for people like The Daily Show or Bill Maher or even the Howard Stern Show. It's great ammo for their for their shows, but for the American taxpayers like you and I, and the upcoming generations that are going to be affected by this. There's no humor in what these policies are set forward to.
County commissioners continue to want to divide us and physically put us in lines, one against the other, at public meetings, for and against. But we are friends. We work together. And if anything happens to my neighbor who may oppose the monument for some reason, we will still be neighbors and friends, and we will still work together to help each other.
And so it was really nice because we're a small enough town, 200 people, that everybody knows everybody. The Mormon Church invites everybody in town to their monthly potluck. And it's more of a community feeling that we're so small we kind of count on each other.
I also think it's a responsibility of everybody that does care about something, you know, to get involved. And it might seem overwhelming and just, oh, you know, well, they've already decided or they've already done this. And that's not the case. And so we've got to remember, you know, we are America. We were based upon, you know, the Constitution that believes in we the people. And so we need to bring it back to that. And so, you know, even though it seems so far away and that we've got a lot of issues going on right now in our country, that, you know, we need to pay attention to the things that we do love. And take the time, if you haven't been to the Grand Staircase, come and visit, you know, and come and see how beautiful it is and help us protect the land.
Born into a garden free of sin, the blissful place of innocence is where we all begin.
But as we get older, the world is getting colder.
What kind of world is it gonna be? It's up to you and me.
Lost in the forest, beneath the darkest sky. Well, it's hard to know which way to go, but we still gotta try.
Make the right choices, lift up our voices, our hearts will show us wrong from right. Be a beacon in the night, be the light.
Be the light.
When hard times try to bring us down,
We'll stand for what's right. Be the light. Be the light.
when hard times try to bring us down,
We'll stand for what's right. Be the light.
guiding all the people who are scared and lonely.
It's time
sometimes try